And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on leadership and development, developing successful interpersonal skills. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. She is executive leadership coach and professional development speaker, Ms. Toni Cooper. Toni, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I hope you are doing wonderfully well. I was hoping to have my webcam on, but it's not showing it, so you get to just hear my voice. It's exciting. We're going to talk for about 45 minutes on one of our courses, Interpersonal Skills. We're going to talk about developing them. I'm going to give you some fun stories. I'll give you a little taste of what we're going to learn, and then we're going to do some activities as we go along. Now, because there's so many of you, the activities are going to be more on your own activities as opposed to everybody talking at the same time. And then I'll give you some tips and tricks that you can work through and practice as you go along. So let's first talk first and foremost about me. I'm Toni Cooper. I am the executive director of a National Battlefield Park Foundation in Michigan, and I'm also a corporate trainer. Worked with New Horizons for a long time, as well as the Zig Ziglar Corporation, and love helping everyone communicate better, improve their leadership skills, and move forward in their career. So today's goal is to talk about interpersonal skills. And the first question to think about is when you hear the word interpersonal skills, what do you think of? And since I don't want to give 100 people the opportunity to speak, I'm going to tell you when I asked people what they said. So some individuals said, well, interpersonal skills is conversations between a husband and wife or a boyfriend and girlfriend. Well, that's absolutely true. It's conversations between your spouse, conversations between children. But in the workplace, interpersonal skills is conversations with everybody you work with. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do and what interpersonal skills are, and then how to improve those skills as we go along. So the goal of the class is this. We're going to recognize the difference between hearing and listening, which is the major step of interpersonal skills. If you want to be effective in communicating, you have to be an effective listener and an effective hearer. And we'll talk about the difference between those. And we're going to talk about techniques to move forward to create high quality conversation. And then I'm going to give you some tips and techniques for you to actually try when this class is over, things that you can put into practice. And we'll do that towards the end of our conversation. So what are interpersonal skills? Interpersonal skills are basically face-to-face communication. Now, they're when you exchange information between one person and another, but it involves two major pieces, verbal and nonverbal messages. Verbal is me talking to you right now. Nonverbal is if my webcam was on and you could see me, what's my facial expressions look like? What are my eyes saying to you? How fast am I speaking? All the things that you don't hear, but you're processing. Interpersonal communication is not just about what is actually said. It's also about how it's said. And that's really important to know because I can say a lot of things, but how I say it means a lot. And you can just think about relationships. Two people are arguing, two friends, two coworkers, and they'll say, well, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. So it's the how is really, really important, and we'll get into that a little bit. So interpersonal communication is that conversation that you're having with another individual. It's not so much the email conversations and the text messaging conversations as it is about actual communicating. So let's talk about that and what does it mean, and I'll give you some fun examples and give you some stories. So here's the first one. I am a mother of two boys. I have currently an 8 and 6-year-old. My 8-year-old will be 9 in a few days. And we were having a conversation. I'm going to give you workplace and life examples, so hopefully it will relate to all of you. But we were having a conversation the other day, and we were talking about, excuse me, we were talking about school, and we're in Michigan, and because of the weather, school has been canceled quite a bit. Not necessarily because of snow, it's because of freezing temperatures below freezing temperatures. And so we've had 11 days off of school, and just because of weather. And I was talking to one of my sons, and I said, well, we need to get out of the house. We need to go do something. We need to go play, go somewhere. And my other son says to me, he says, all right, well, let's go to Sky Zone. It's like a trampoline place where you can jump up and down. And my youngest said, why would we want to go through the sky? And I said, what do you mean go through the sky? He goes, well, what's sky zone? So he didn't understand it. It's a really simple conversation, and we had to explain because he's never been there what it's about. The thing about kids that's different between workplace is when they don't understand what you said, they will often ask questions. What is sky zone? What is this? Explain this. The problem is sometimes when we get into the workplace, what happens with interpersonal communication is we assume we know what someone's thinking, and we don't often ask for clarification. We don't often ask for them to tell us more information. And quite often, people won't tell you when they don't understand. Well, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how to get clarification by still sounding intelligent and sounding like you know what you're talking about. We're going to talk about how to lead the conversation in a direction that makes sense. We're also going to talk about how interpersonal skills will help you in your workplace. Be a better leader, be a better employee, be a better coworker, all of those things. So the first question is what factors affect interpersonal communication? Now, these aren't the only factors that you see here, but I'll give you a few. Cultural influence. Cultural influence is the language that we use. We may have language barriers. I'm not quite sure where everyone here is from, but maybe English is not your second language. So we may have a cultural influence in our communication where we may find that we don't completely understand each other because of our language. Or where I come from versus where you come from could have an effect on how we communicate. Those are all influences that affect our interpersonal communication, good or bad. Power. Now, power doesn't necessarily mean just, you are a boss. Power could also mean that you are somebody of influence. You have power in the communication. There's always somebody in a face-to-face communication that has slightly more power than the other person. And what that means is they may have more influence on the conversation. That has a huge effect on your communication skills. If you're the person with influence, you may come off more self-confident, stronger in your communication, more believable. If you're the person that's not of influence in that conversation, you may be more of a listener. So that has a big influence on how we communicate and what we say. Situational. Situational is maybe you're in a meeting. That's a situation. That's an area that you're at. So the situational could be the location that you're at, what's going on around you, whether there's 10 people in there in a meeting that you're communicating with, or it's a one-on-one conversation. A big thing that affects interpersonal communication is our surroundings. That's the noise around us. So right now, what is going on around you? Just look around you. Look around if you're sitting at a desk. Are there a bunch of people talking? Are you playing on your phone, texting, checking your email, and doing all of that right now? That's the noise that's going around. If we're having a face-to-face communication right now and you're sitting down and you're looking at your phone, that's going to affect how you and I communicate. That's going to affect our relationship. And that leads us right into technology. Technology has a huge impact. So many of us now communicate through texting or through email, and we don't often have these face-to-face communication or even telephone conversations anymore. So that's going to affect it. But what does all this mean? Knowing that all these things affect our communication, how do we improve it? How do we become a communicator that can help make decisions, that can influence the direction of our workplace, that can motivate people to move forward and do more, to help us become a better leader? When you have effective interpersonal communication skills, you become a better leader. But also what it does is it helps us build relationships. Relationships to have better team, better culture in our environment, better relationships at home, better relationships with our bosses and employees. Somebody who is an effective communicator tends to have the most effective relationships. So what makes an effective communicator? I don't have a slide on this, but I want you to think about it for a moment. If you have a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, just write down right now 3 things that you think make you an effective communicator. What makes you effective at communicating? I'll give you 10 seconds to write it down. Now, if you look at that list, those are your skill sets. Those are the things that you're good at. So if you can take those skill sets that make you an effective communicator and build on that, then you'll be able to be a more effective leader, a more effective communicator, a more effective everything. So I'll tell you my skills. My skills in interpersonal communication is listening. However, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would never have told you that. I've had to work really hard at being a more effective leader, especially in the role that I play, which I'll give you an example in a moment. So the role that I play is I'm the executive director of a large nonprofit foundation, a national battlefield park in Michigan. And if you've ever been the head of a nonprofit organization, you know that it takes a lot of listening to your donors, to your volunteers, to the staff, and so on and so forth. Now, my foundation has three staff members, three team members. The park itself, who I also work with and we have a little over 20 team members, and all of us have to work together. And so when one of my team members comes into my office and has something to tell me, I have to put everything down and listen. If I don't make a conscious decision to listen, then all the noise around me, all the situations, all the surrounding, all the technology around me makes me so I may misinterpret that conversation. So they may be telling me about an upcoming program or a problem they're having with another team member or something that's going to be happening in the future. And if I'm not listening and I'm just going, then I have a huge problem there. First of all, I'm not a good leader. Second of all, the miscommunication can happen and I can fail at something. It's happened many times. I can tell you, we had a donor that gave us a donation and she verbally told us what the donation was for. Unfortunately, one of my team members wasn't listening, didn't hear her, and the donation went for the wrong item. As you can see, it was a $100,000 donation. It was supposed to be for our field trips, and we did not realize that, and we put it towards something else. We had to make that right, and we had to fix it. So there was a huge miscommunication. So when I look at the skills that I wrote down listening as one of my greatest interpersonal communication skills, but it's something that I've had to work on, which I'll give you some tips on how to do that. You may have written that you have good nonverbal communication skills. You have good eye contact. There's a lot of things that influence our interpersonal communication, a lot of skills we can build to be better. Here are some of them. There's verbal, nonverbal, negotiation, problem solving, and decision making. That's not all of them, but that's what this whole course talks about. Today, we're going to focus on the verbal and the nonverbal in the next 40 minutes or so. We'll talk about some verbal skills that we can have. We'll talk about how to improve our nonverbal skills. And then at the end, I'll give you some tips and tricks that you can actually put into practice to try it right after this course. So what are verbal communication techniques? Verbal communication techniques are the words that we use. It's not the how, that's the nonverbal, it's the words. Words are powerful tools of communication. Words can make or break, especially nowadays in the social media era. The words that we choose can have a huge influence on how people see things. The big part of verbal communication is this second sentence right here. Giving full attention to the language of others can provide insight in what they are really intending to say. What people say is not often what we hear because we're processing in our brain, and we'll get to that in a moment. But your words are important, and us listening to those words are important. And when we get to the concept of paraphrasing or summarizing, I'm going to show you just how important they are. So verbal communication is what you're saying, the tone that you're using, the words that you're using. You choose certain words for a reason. You might say, I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm elated. All of those have different impacts on how you feel it. You could tell somebody, good job. You could tell somebody you did fantastic. You could say good work on that. Those words have influence on how people are interpreting the message. The more specific you can get, the better you are at verbal communication. Good is a pretty broad word, so I could just say thank you for being on time for the past 4 days. That's more specific instead of thank you, good job getting here. The words that we use has a huge impact on what happens. That's part of verbal communication. The other part of verbal communication is listening and hearing. And here's the question. What's the difference between listening and hearing? Have you ever heard somebody say, well, you might have heard me, but you didn't listen? Well, there actually is a definition of the two words. I'm going to show you that. Hearing is a physiological process of perceiving and identifying sounds. You just heard the sounds. Maybe you didn't hear what they were saying, but you just heard sounds. Right now, what's going on around you? You're hearing noises. You may hear cars. You may hear phones ringing. You may hear people talking in the background. That's hearing. Listening requires active participation. Listening is you and I are having a conversation, and you, Jane, say, hey, Tony, how are you doing? And I respond, oh, I'm doing great. How are you? And then you respond, and we have this back and forth conversation. We're trying to reach an understanding. If you're telling me that there's a problem with a project, me really understanding that project, listening is listening to what you're saying, listening to your words, making a conscious decision. So we're about to do a poll, and Kelly's going to bring up a poll in a moment, and I'll put the question up on the screen as well. And I want you to rate yourself. I want you to be honest with the poll. And the reason I want you to be honest is because no one's going to know what you said. And I just want to get a feel for where everybody's at. So you'll see the poll. And the question of the poll is, how well do you think you listen during most of your conversations? The first answer is, I listen well and can summarize the other person. I partially listen as I wait for my turn to speak. I'm not a great listener. I often thinking about what I'm going to say next. So if you could just go ahead and answer that poll.
All right, so we're at about 46% saying that they listen well and can summarize, about the same number partially listen, and about 8% that I am not a great listener.
Okay, so good. So we're about half and half, 1 and 2. Okay. I'm glad none of you said I'm not a great listener, or not everybody said it. You'll find that in most of them, everybody has somewhat of a pretty good listening skill. I would tell you that 5 years ago, I probably would have answered number 3, because I was always thinking about what I'm going to say next, because I want to be the one speaking. And what I'm learning is listening is way more important. You have 2 ears to listen and 1 mouth to speak, so listen more often than you speak, if you've ever heard that saying. So many of you said you partially listen or you listen well. Now, we're going to talk about what summarizing actually means. We'll get some tips on that. And then you partially listen. Let's be honest, there are times where somebody's talking and you're busy, and so you're just not listening as well as you hope. So I'm going to give you some quick tips right now on that for a moment. And I don't have a slide for this because this just popped in my head of some things to share with you. But here's something that I do. If I'm calling somebody on the phone and they answer and I need to speak with them, the first thing I'll ask them is, do you have 10 minutes or do you have 5 minutes? I need to speak with you. I'm giving them the option to get out of the conversation because they can't give me their full attention. I'd highly recommend, if you have a pen and paper, write that down. When you're communicating with somebody, whether you're going over to their office or going over to where they sit, or you're calling them on the phone, you're likely interrupting them. So it's a courtesy to say, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Do you have 10 minutes? However long you think it's going to take that I can speak with you. And give them the option to say, you know what, I do have 10 minutes if you give me 5, I can give you my full attention. Or, you know what, right now is not a good time. Can I call you back at 2:30? Whatever that is, giving the people the open door to say, you know what, I am distracted. So if you need me to listen to you, I'm not going to. As opposed to calling on the phone, answering the phone, going, hey, Kelly, how you doing? Da, 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 and start right into the conversation, whereas Kelly was actually doing something. So one way to improve your speaking and your verbal communication is giving people the option to actually listen. Telling them, I need 10 minutes of your time. I need 5 minutes of your time, and being realistic with it. I highly recommend that. Okay? If you have questions about this, you can write them down or type them in there, and we'll answer them as we go or towards the end. So here's something interesting that many of you may know, or may not. But this is universal. This is worldwide, no matter which country you're in. This is the average number. In some cultures, they speak a little faster than this, but the average person can speak 100 to 175 words per minute. But we can listen at 600 to 800 words per minute. So what does that mean? That our brain is moving faster than we're speaking. So we have to consciously tell ourselves, stop. Let's really listen to what this person's saying. I want to be an effective communicator. I want to have effective relationships. So I have to stop and listen. And I'll give you tips on how to do that in a moment. I will say this, if you're talking to individuals in other cultures or that there's a language barrier, you may want to slow down your speech as well. His 175 words per minute is fast if it's not their first, if English isn't their first language or whichever language. So we think faster than we speak. So often when someone is talking to us, we're thinking about what we want to say next already. Right now, you're probably thinking about the 50,000 things that you have to do besides just interpersonal communication. That's just the way it is. We have to consciously say, guess what? I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear what she has to say. I'm going to really try to take this all in. I'm going to put some tips down. Okay? So the key word here is conscious choice to listen. You have to tell yourself, I'm going to listen. Now, I'll give you another example. Let's talk about kids for any of you that have children. But have you ever been doing something and the child comes up to you and says, hey, mom, hey, dad, can you help me with something? And you go, yeah, in a minute. You really didn't hear a word they said. You just responded, yeah, in a minute. Instead of saying, you know what, yes, I can help you. Take a moment, actually listen, say, I'll be available in about 5 minutes if that will work. Same thing in the workplace. In the summertime, our national park is extremely busy, and we have about 30 seasonal staff that range from age. Our youngest seasonal staff employee is 15 years old, and last year our oldest was 82. And it's a lot of different cultures, a lot of different age groups and generations, and some of them love to interrupt, some of them don't. And so I have to actually put a stop sign on my door to say, right now I'm working. You can't come in. If you need me, or if it's an emergency, go ahead and knock. But I had to do that for about 30 minutes a day so I could get some things done. Otherwise, I wasn't listening. I was thinking about everything that I was doing. So we have weekly meetings, and our weekly meetings are updates, and it gives all the team members the opportunity to say what they need to say. I don't run them. I just listen. I sit there and I listen. I try not to speak. If I do any speaking, it will be at the end, and it's to summarize everything that they said and what we're going to do with our steps. Listening is a conscious decision. Otherwise, you're way out in left field and your brain is way past where we're at. Okay? All right, so what are some ways we can become better listeners? Okay. We can actively listen with the following things. We can listen with full intention, which we just talked about. We can ask questions, which we'll do in a moment. We can paraphrase, which some of you said you're good at summarizing. I'll give you some other fun tips for it. We can provide nonverbal communication, giving them an eye contact, putting down the phone. And then being a powerful communicator is all of this wrapped into one, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So how do we ask questions in conversations? Mm-hmm. Well-crafted questions help you to create an engaging conversation. It establishes rapport, it sparks interest, it opens up new subject areas. It helps to demonstrate that you are of interest. So if you're thinking right now of some questions, you can always write them down in the question box, and we'll go over them in a little bit. But questions are the key to conversation. They show that you're interested. They definitely build rapport, but they can also, which we're not going to get into in depth today, but they can also influence the conversation. If the conversation is going in the wrong direction, you can ask a question to bring it back. And there's ways to do that respectfully, and there's ways to do that rudely. And we're going to talk about how to do it respectfully. So what are the three types of questions? Now, there's lots of kinds of questions you could ask, but we're going to categorize them into three categories, and I'll give you some examples. Closed questions. Those are your yes or no's. Now, when do you use those? So you have a team member that's talking to you about a project and a project that needs to be completed, and they're giving you an update, and you're finding that you really need an answer to Are they on time? You really just want to know, is it on time? And so that can be the question. Is it on time? Yes or no? And if it's no, they may say no and give you some more information, or they might say no and you have to lead into another question. Closed questions are, look, I love everything that you're saying, but I need a yes or no answer. Okay. Closed questions could be something as simple as, was the client happy? Did the project get complete? Did you receive payment for the invoice? That's your yes or no questions. In conversation, they're great for those individuals that are maybe communicating to a point where they're getting off topic. You could ask a simple one-word question, a question that just needs a yes or no answer to sort of bring the conversation back to where you need it to be, or to stop the individual from going on. Okay. Open-ended questions, those are your who, when, where, what, how, why. Leaders often ask how questions quite often. How do you think that's going to get accomplished? How do you see it being done? Effective leaders do that. The who, obviously, that's pretty obvious. Who is doing it? When is it going to be completed? Where are you at right now? What are the next steps? How is a great one, and I don't think it's used as often as it should. How elicits conversation and allows the person to give more. So if you're the leader and you're working with one of your team members, you can say, how do you think it needs to be accomplished? What do you see as the next steps? Why? I love the question why. However, at the same time, it can sometimes become offensive depending on how you're asking it. So let me give you an example. If I came up to you and you are my boss, and I said, boss, we were working on getting this project complete. We were writing this code, and we got a virus and we lost part of it. We're working on it again. And you could say, why did you let that happen? Okay, so now if I said, why did you let that happen? Or if you said to me, why did you let that happen? You're insinuating that it's all my fault. And I could potentially take offense to that. Maybe you didn't mean it by offensively. You really just wanted to know why it happened. A better way, instead of saying why, is, how do you think it could happen so it doesn't happen again? Or what do you think caused it so that it doesn't happen again? It's just words. Why is good if you're really wanting to know more? Why is the world round? Why do we have this? But for some reason lately in the workplace, why can sometimes become offensive. So I'd be careful with its use and think about what you're saying when you say it. Okay. Purposeful questions. Those are very, very handy questions, and I'll give you some examples. They're thoughtful questions. They're posed for clear reason. Purposeful questions often have the what, the how, the when, the who within them, but sometimes they're just asking for clarification. So what I'm hearing is A, B, C, D. Is that correct? That's a purposeful question. What I'm hearing you saying is that this, and this. Is that correct? So purposeful questions are those questions where you're asking for more clarification, you're trying to get down to the reason, you're really paying attention to what's going on. Sometimes you'll hear me in conversations say, we're in a meeting. I serve on the board of another nonprofit, and we were having a conversation about a breakfast event that we're having, and there were a lot of confusing pieces. And so what I ended up saying is, can I just get some clarification? I'm going to summarize what I heard. Could you tell me if that is correct or not? So I summarized what I heard. That was the question that I asked. They told me yes or no, or they said, no, this is what we meant. So sometimes purposeful questions is, I really just want to understand what you're saying. I don't quite get it. This is a great skill in listening. Closed, open, and purposeful questions. If you have a talker, somebody that loves to talk, you may need to use more closed questions, but you have to listen really well. If you have somebody who is not giving you enough information, you may need to use purposeful questions. And for the purposes of ours today, I'm just going to give you examples. Okay. So how do we take the questions and then use them in our summary? So 10 years ago when people used to teach paraphrasing, it was you had to be like a parrot. You had to say exactly what that person says. I'm going to challenge you and tell you don't be a parrot. Just because they said, I'm not feeling well today, you go, oh, you're not feeling well today? Why not? Okay, that's a parrot. Summarizing is taking the conversation and putting it into your own words, but also listening for the meaning and listening to their words. Now, let me give you an example, and I'm going to give you a really, really simple example, and you can apply this into the workplace and more. When I'm talking with somebody, so I'll give you a real life example. I'm meeting an individual named Doug, and Doug is the CEO of a large bank. And I was asking Doug about his business and about the bank and the culture of the bank. And he says, I have the most amazing team members. We've worked to really change the culture, make the culture a place where it doesn't feel like that bank teller effect, where people feel like they have a voice in it. And he kept talking all about it. And he kept talking about his team members, his team members, his team members. Now, if the next thing I said was, so your employees are really good employees, or so you're happy that your employees are happy, for him, without even realizing it, we broke the conversation. Unconsciously, he heard me say the word employee. So unconsciously, he's thinking she's not even listening. I really need to listen to his words and use one of his words in my sentence. So I need to use the word team members because that's what he used. That's another skill in summarizing that we can all use, but we don't use often enough. One aspect of summarizing is using one word that they say and then bringing it back. So if we had, a, 2 hours together, we could try this tip and work together trying it, but I'm going to do it as if I'm two people. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to use two different voices. I apologize for the goofy voices. I am not a voiceover person, but here we go. So this voice right now is Tony, and this voice right now is Doug. Okay, now that's not how Doug really talks, but just go with it. Okay, here's an example. Hey, Doug, how are you doing? I'm good, Tony. How are you? I'm doing great. How's the bank business going? What's been going on? You'll never believe it. I have this amazing team. We have worked for the past 5 years on changing the culture of the organization. We are working on these 6 pillars of success. Right now, we're on pillar number 2. And pillar number 2 is everybody has a voice. So now here's the key. I want to know more about the pillar number 2 about everybody having a voice. Now I could do it one of two ways. I could go, oh, well, tell me about that. Okay, that's one way to do it. But to really show I'm listening, I would say, tell me about that everybody has a voice concept or everybody has a voice pillar. See, I asked the exact same question. Just in my question this time, I used some of his words to continue the conversation. The other thing I did is I showed that I was listening and I led the conversation to where I wanted to get more about pillar 2. Maybe 3, 4, 5, and 6 are important as well, but since I want to know more about 2, I said, tell me more about every employee has a voice pillar. So you can influence the conversation by summarizing properly, but you can also listen more effectively by listening to their words. If you're talking to a parent and you say, what's your baby's name? And they said, well, my child's name's Andrew. From then on, I'm going to use the word child. Or my boys' names are so on and so forth. I'm going to say, oh, how are your boys doing? So it's a simple skill that quite honestly, not enough people do it. So I really highly recommend that one. I don't have a slide for it, but it's just a recommendation. Right? The other aspect of summarizing is repetition. Acknowledge what you've heard, focus on that interesting aspect, and I would add to that right there when I say focus on interesting aspect, using their words, and then encourage further collaboration or elaboration. The beauty of being able to summarize effectively is you can lead the conversation any way you want. So it helps you become better solution oriented, it helps you be a better negotiator, and it helps you influence the conversation. All right. So that's listening. We'll get into that one, the one you just saw, in a moment. Let's talk about nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication, you can't see me right now. I can't see you, but if we just pretended, some of you might be looking down. Some of you may have your full attention on the screen. Some of you may be looking at your phone. Nonverbal communication is all the other things, not what you're saying, but it's the how. Are you giving eye contact? Are you speaking fast? Are you speaking with a weird tone of voice? How important is nonverbal communication? Well, let's talk about that. Your nonverbal communication, words represent 7% of the conversation. The tone of voice is 38%, but your body language is 55% of the conversation. Now, this is face-to-face interpersonal communication. Obviously, if it's social media or email or text, words play 100% of the conversation. Okay. So your body language has a huge impact. I can look at you and say, I'm happy, but have a sad face, my eyes sunken down, and you can tell that I'm not. So what I say might not actually be what you're interpreting. Okay? Your silence, your body language has more effect on the communication than anything. So not only do you need to pay attention to what you're saying and how you're saying and all these other listening skills, you also have to have the right body language. Okay. I'll tell you, when I'm in meetings and I take notes on my phone, if I take notes on my phone, I tell them, I apologize. If it's okay, I'm going to take notes on my phone, and I put my phone right out there so they see that I'm not playing with it or being rude. Because then my body language shows that I'm being rude, and I don't want to do that. So what are these aspects of nonverbal communication? Okay. Your tone, your pace, your emphasis, your volume, your clarity. That's your voice. Hey, how are you? Sounds very high pitched. Woohoo! We're excited, right? Hello, my name's Tony. Thank you for coming to class. I hope you all have fun with the pace. That could mean that I'm nervous because I'm talking really fast. Okay. Or hello, welcome to interpersonal communication. Okay, so you see those are different paces. Obviously, depending on who you're communicating with, your pace is going to be different. The words that you emphasize are important. The words that you emphasize are highly, highly important. I could put up 3 sentences. You could say them 3 different ways by emphasizing different words, and it has an effect. Let me use a simple sentence. Why are you late? Why are you late? Why are you late? Right? 3 different things that I'm saying. Okay, 3 different emphasis. Volume, the loud talking can have one effect. The quiet. I highly recommend to change your volume all the time. The clarity is how well you understand the person. That can be affected by obviously language barriers, or my youngest is in speech therapy, so not everybody understands him. So how we deliver it has one effect, and then our body language has the other. Okay, if you recall, if we go back, the tone is 38%. That's what this represents. Mm-hmm. The body language, which is 55%, are these things. Your eye contact. Now I'm going to give you a tip, and if you have a pen and paper, write this down. You don't have to look directly into somebody's eyes and stare at them. Okay? You can look into their eyes for 2 seconds and then look the other way. But the other thing you can do is you can look right between their eyes, kind of like where the nose meets. So you can look at the tip of their nose or their forehead, and they'll still feel like you're looking at their eyes, but they won't feel like you're staring. So you can have straight contact depending on if you're trying to get something across, make somebody do something. You might want very strong eye contact in negotiations. I've had the amazing privilege of learning from an individual named Colin Powell, who was a huge military individual, highly influential leader. And he talked about when he was in the negotiations once in Asia, and the body language and how so important was. And he sat down and he had to make sure his eyes looked down at certain points. He had to give direct eye contact. His posture, he had to be straight up. His facial expression was normal. The other key part is that's not on here is where he sat. He didn't sit directly straight across from the person that he was negotiating with. He sat slightly to an angle from that individual as to not create a bit of fear. He wasn't trying to be a domineering person. He was trying to set the mood to build a relationship. So even how you sit directly across, showing direct eye contact, can have effects on that. If somebody's really tall and somebody's really short, that can have an effect So, you may want to sit if you're really tall so you can create that eye contact. Facial expressions, the smile versus the frown versus the I don't know what I'm saying face, or you're confusing me face. Those facial expressions can say a lot. Your posture. Your posture is how you're standing. Are you standing up straight? Are you listening? Are you fidgeting? Are you playing with your phone? The gestures are how your hands are moving. I don't know if you've ever met people where they talk with their hands. Well, I speak with my hands, but I try to make sure that my hands are actually saying something, not just wailing around. But I have a friend who talks with her hands so much that when we're in restaurants, she often hits people walking by. You might want to slow that down a little bit. And then proximities. How close are you? In certain cultures, you're going to want to be a little bit further apart. In other cultures, you need to be closer together. And we're not going to get into that today. But, if you can put your arm out without touching, that's probably a good distance to be from the other individual if you're standing or you're talking, via the sitting in chairs and things of that nature. The other aspect of body language in regards to physical contact also could be the handshake. How you shake somebody's hand has a huge effect on the message. All right, do you have a nice, strong handshake? Or is it weak and you didn't really care to shake their hands? All your body language can influence the conversation, can make the conversation make you a better leader, make you stronger, and it can lead the conversation where you need it to be. So these are all just overview, big picture summaries. I hope you're getting some basic tips. Now let's get into some tips and tricks, and then we'll summarize the class. The art of the conversation. I want you to think for a moment. Just think about this. The first step in developing conversation skills is to understand what factors interfere with your ability to handle a conversation. What holds you back with a stranger? What holds you back with somebody who you know? What holds you back with talking to your boss or to your coworker? It could be fear. It could be you just don't know how to start the conversation. It could be that maybe you're afraid what they're going to say. Maybe they intimidate you. All these things you can work on. I always tell people the mirror is your friend. If you don't have anybody else to work with on communication, just go in a bathroom, lock the door, and use the mirror to practice. If you don't have the mirror, then if you have a telephone with a camera on it, make the camera look like a selfie, like it's looking at you, and talk to yourself that way. Even record it and watch it back so you can improve yourself. That's just a simple tip to try. Okay? What holds you back is what can hold you from being an effective communicator and an effective relationship builder. Okay? So if you have fear of talking with somebody, the best thing I can do is just do it. Okay? Practice on others if you need to. Here's the part of art of powerful conversation. Okay? Powerful conversation allows you to really build a strong relationship. It allows you to be an effective leader. It allows you to move forward and where you're at. And this is the wheel of powerful conversation. It doesn't stop because these are things that are constantly going. You fit your conversation to your audience. Fit how you communicate to your audience. If there's somebody who needs direct answers, give them direct answers. If there's somebody that needs you to, I call it make fluffy conversation. They need to hear that they're doing well. They need to hear compliments. Do that. Build rapport. Make sure you're understanding the person. You're summarizing. You're really listening. Stick to the point. If you're having a conversation, try to stay on point instead of going in 15 different directions and no one knew where you went. Okay. Emphasize key ideas. You can do that by writing them down. You can do that by having a presentation, giving an agenda if it's a meeting. I can tell you that even when I have one-on-one meetings with my staff, there's still an agenda so that we do stick to the point. Otherwise, our one-on-one meetings will go from 30 minutes to well over 2 hours if we didn't have an agenda. And then avoid being too casual. This is conversation in the workplace is what we're referring to. Avoid being too casual. And you can ask about how your day is, but you might not need to know every little detail of it. Too casual, keep it professional in conversation. Avoid cursing if that's not the workplace that you have and things of that nature. All right, so think about these and you'll get this recording afterwards. So if you didn't get to write this down, you can get this later. to start a conversation. And then once we're done with, we're going to go through this, and then I'm going to give you some tips and tricks. Okay. Know your strengths and what you have to offer a conversation. Everybody has it. If you don't know, ask your best friends, ask your spouse, ask your children, ask your coworkers what strengths you have in conversation, and use those strengths to your ability. I'm not a small talk person. I don't really do well with how's the weather and this and that. I'm an individual that I've been told I'm insightful, so I really want to know the individual. So my strengths in conversation are really getting to know people. I have great friends who are wonderful at small talk. So when we go to places, I'll bring my small talk friend and I together. It's a good compliment. Be curious about others, genuinely interested. That's so important. Hear their words, listen to what they're having to say. Prepare your introduction and a number of conversation starters. Those always work, even if you're going into somebody you know really well, like going to talk with your boss or talk to a coworker. Prepare what you want to say ahead of time so that you can lead it where you want. And I think the last one's the most important. Be yourself. Let your personality do the talking. So many times people try to be someone else, and I don't think that's going to get you anywhere. Transparency and honesty are a huge part of interpersonal communication. Transparency and honesty, they're huge in interpersonal communication. So what are some tips? Okay. I'm going to give you, I thought I had a slide. I apologize. I must have hid the slide. So let me give you some tips, okay, for interpersonal communication. You can write these down, and I'm sorry, I thought I had the slide for it, but I apologize. So here's some tips. One is what I call the softball example. Other people used to call it the toilet paper. I'm going to give you 2 tips and then we'll wrap up. The softball example is this. I used to have a friend, his name's Dave, and well, actually he's still a friend. He's the CEO of a major company. And when you walk into his office, on his desk, there's this squishy ball. And it's just sitting there, and I sat down and I said, what in the world is this squishy ball for? And he says, this is when we're going to have heated conversations. He says he learned it at a marriage counseling retreat with him and his wife, and they use it all the time with their kids and him, so he decided to bring it to the workplace. So when you walk in, if you know you're going to have a really heated conversation where maybe you're not going to listen really well, you get to hold the ball. The person with the ball in their hand is the speaker. You get to talk. Then when you're done speaking, you pass the ball to the other individual. That individual first has to summarize what you said, ask for clarification, and then if they have it, then they get to make their point. What it does is it stops us from thinking about what we're going to say and forces us to listen. So whoever has the ball is the speaker, and the other person can't speak until they summarize what you said. The reason it's a squishy ball is so that, he said, they don't throw it at you when they're mad. He says it's really good when you're upset. You're going to have a heated conversation, because when you're upset, you don't listen as well. So that's the softball or squishy ball example. They also call it the toilet paper because people will do it with toilet paper rolls, which might be kind of strange having on your desk. So the ball works really well. Another example is we have what's called the no monkeys on our back. Okay? This came from my friend Doug that I was telling you about, the CEO of a company. He has these little furry monkeys on his desk, and I asked him what those were for, and he says, because I don't want people to bring monkeys and put them on my back. They keep their own. He goes, a monkey on the back is, and a team member has a problem, or a coworker has the problem, and they come to you and they tell you their problem, and then they expect you to fix it. So they just took the monkey off their back and put it on you, and now you have to fix the problem. If you're effective at interpersonal communication, the better thing to say is, what solutions have you come up with so far? And make them think about it. The CEO, Doug, he requires that you have at least 3 solutions, good or bad. They can be terrible solutions, before you come with a problem. Okay, so if you have an issue, what are your 3 solutions to fix it? They could all be terrible, but you had to show that you at least thought of it. So the idea is, instead of taking other people's problems on through communication, you're going to keep the monkey on their back. You're just going to say, hey, what solutions have you come up with? Can we work through some solutions? Can I work through some solutions with you? Instead of taking the conversation and saying, okay, well, you know what, I'll handle it. Okay? That's a big aspect of interpersonal communication, is don't take everything on yourself. So to summarize what we just talked about, it's ask a lot of questions, ask for clarification and examples, be the listener, not the speaker. Listen with 2 ears as much as possible. Use their words. in the conversation. When summarizing, really hear what they have to say, ask for clarification. If you're going to get in a really heated conversation, a communication that might not go the right way, try the softball. You don't actually have to hand them the ball. You can just pretend that they have the ball. And then when they pass it to you, you have to summarize if that works for you. It works great with kids as well. Mm-hmm. And the overall big picture is interpersonal communication takes work. It takes practice. It's something that you have to practice daily. And the beauty is you have the ability to practice daily because we come into conversation with people every day at the grocery store, at the gas stations, at work, at home, all over the place. So work on it daily and work on it in the mirror, work on it while you're driving, record yourself, listen to yourself. That's the best way to be more effective at interpersonal communication. So today we just talked about the verbal and the nonverbal. There's a lot more to it, but if you can take those two things and just work on those on a daily basis for 30 days, you'll find that you'll be a more effective influencer, a more effective leader, and you'll have stronger relationships. Thank you all. I appreciate your time. We're going to pass it over to Kelly to find out what questions you guys have.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. If you guys have any questions, feel free to type those in now. We have a few minutes. We will address those over audio. In the meantime, just a friendly reminder that I will be sending you all the recording link for today's session so you can review, pass on to any colleagues who were unable to join us. I also want to direct you to our website at newhorizons.com. And there you will find all of our information on our Center for Leadership and Development on courses such as this one, Developing Successful Interpersonal Skills. So please contact your local New Horizons rep. And if you are not familiar with who that is, you can log on to newhorizons.com and do a zip code search to find the center nearest you. All right, so let's go. We do have some questions, Tony. So the first one we have is, do you think that people who are really good at communicating in person struggle with communicating online and email with teammates? How can we make that better?
All the time, yes. So if you're an effective communicator in person, sometimes we're not as good online because you have to really think about what you're saying. So here's what I would say to make you better at communicating via online or email is number one is when you are typing an email or typing a message online, write it and then think about it for a moment and read it out loud. It's amazing, but don't read it to yourself. Read it out loud because when you read it out loud, you'll hear the tone much more effectively than if you read it to yourself. So that's number one. Read the message out loud before sending. It only takes an extra 30 seconds. The other thing that I would recommend practicing is, interestingly enough, this is the craziest way to practice, but I have a good friend who says everybody misinterprets her emails. And I said, all right, well, how about we spend a week and you just send me things that you're thinking through email and let me start reading them and see what you have to do. I have a team member, an employee that does this exact same thing. He's very offensive in his emails, but he doesn't mean to be. So I actually have her for a week just send me different emails throughout what she's thinking, and we kind of worked through them. So we coached her through it. So if you can find a really good friend who's honest with you, who's willing to read some of your messages and tell you how they interpret it, that's another way to practice. I think the biggest reason why it's hard to have effective messages is because you don't know the tone or the mood that the person reading it is in. So your word choices has a huge effect. Zig Ziglar, who was a mentor of mine, said that if you write at the 6th grade level, when you send emails, you generally won't offend nearly as many people. And if you use really big words that people have to look up in a dictionary, you tend to get more offensive. Strange as it goes. I hope that answered your question. Just a little tip.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Next question we have is, when speaking on a Skype or online meeting, what are some tips in body language that you would have?
Okay, so if I were on webcam right now, I would be standing up talking with you. So for me, I find personally that standing up is more effective than sitting down for me. The other thing that I recommend for body language is to sit a little further from the computer, as far away as you can, with still being able to do what you need to do. When you're sitting up close, it's almost like a magnifying glass on the screen, so the body language has a huge effect. The other aspects when you're on Skype or on a webcam communicating is if you're finding that you need to take a lot of notes. So what they're going to see is your eyes always looking down. So it will feel like you're not paying attention. I would announce, I'm listening to every one of you. I hope you don't mind, but I want to take notes on some of the things that you guys are saying and let them know you're taking notes. And then the other thing is to provide eye contact. If you just look directly at your camera, you're providing eye contact without even realizing that you're giving eye contact. So those are some real simple tips. Again, for me, I don't know why, but standing up makes me pay more attention than sitting down. If I'm sitting down, I never lean back in my chair because it creates a lazy look to it. And if I'm taking notes, I make sure I let everybody know.
All right. That was a great tip. Thank you. All right. That's going to wrap it up for our questions. So, Tony, again, thank you so much for joining us today and presenting on behalf of New Horizons.
Hey, Kelly, can I finish with one final thought for
Sure.
everybody? Okay, so I'm going to
Definitely.
give you guys a really, really quick story, and hopefully this will finish your thought, and hopefully this will do something for you. So this wasn't my story. Zig Ziglar used to tell this story, and he gave me permission to say it. But let's pretend. So you guys are all employees of my company, and I'm the boss, and I come to all of you and I say, you guys have been late way too often. This is ridiculous. From this point forward, anybody who's late is going to be solely reprimanded from this point forward. So the next day comes along, and my opportunity clock doesn't go off, and so I wake up late for work, and I'm driving to work, and I get pulled over, and there's a police officer, and the police officer pulls me over, and I get a ticket, and I say to myself, this is ridiculous. Don't they have criminals to get? Why are they pulling me over? I have to get to work. And when I finally walk into work, I walk in and there's Kelly, and Kelly's the customer service rep at the front counter, and she says, hey, Tony, how you doing? And I looked at Kelly and I said, Kelly, what are you talking about? Don't you have work to do? You get things done. Stop talking to me. And Kelly says, who does she think she is? I've been here 15 years. I work really hard. I'm here. How dare she talk to me that way? Then Jim comes along and he goes to Kelly and he says, Kelly, I got a problem. He says, we have this project and I was hoping you could look at it. You're the expert on this. Could you review it for me? And Kelly says, don't you have better things to do? That's not my job, Jim. Go ask somebody else. I'm not going to help you. And Jim walks away and says, who does she think she is? I've been here 5 years. She knows this project's part hers too. How dare she talk to me like that? Then suddenly Karen comes along, and Karen comes to Jim and says, Jim, he says, we have this meeting right now. You're supposed to be at the meeting. Why aren't you there? And Jim says, I got better things to do than go to that meeting. Go run the meeting yourself. Karen walks away and says, who does Jim think he is? I've been here for 15 years. I've worked my butt off. Why is he talking to me like this? This meeting's our meeting. I always have to do everything in here. Well, by this time, it's the end of the day. The meeting's ended, and Karen's driving home. And when Karen gets home, she walks in the door and she sees her kids. Now, just know this is a made-up story, so please don't take any offense to any of it. So when Karen sees her son says, hey, Mommy, and Karen looks and she says, you have a hole in your school pants. Didn't I tell you that when you get home from school, you change your pants? Now, march right on upstairs right now and go stay in your room. And her little boy goes upstairs and says, who does she think she is? All I wanted to do was play. That hole didn't even happen. She didn't even give me a chance to speak. And just then a cat walks by, and Karen's little boy kicks the cat. Now, what's the lesson here? Wouldn't it have been easier for me, the boss of the company at the time, for me to drive over to Karen's house and kick the cat myself? One big aspect of interpersonal communication is don't be a cat kicker. Don't be a cat kicker. Be the person that communicates effectively and doesn't affect everybody around you. Because how you speak and how you communicate and what you say is going to affect the next person, the next person, the next person. And sooner or later, you're going to be the one that's kicking the cat. So I leave you with the final thought is don't be a cat kicker. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tony. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. That will conclude today's webinar. You may now log off. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.